Have you ever thought about what you would do if you saw the same person by destroying your life, your loved ones, your dreams? Nathan lived this, but his name almost disappeared from the books. Today I will tell you something that many try to hide. The details of this story will leave you without air. At that Thanksgiving table, 7 men did not imagine that they would be the last to lift cups before the hammer of justice came down on his heads. The truth about this case has remained in the shadows for decades. But now you will know every disturbing detail that official records have tried to erase. If you believe each resistance story deserves to be told, subscribe to the channel right now and activate the bell so you don't miss any revelation like this. I promise that after this video, you will never look at American history in the same way. Nathan was not just a name. He became a symbol that many feared pronounced. And before we finish this story, you will understand why. The ruins of Plantation Clearwater today mark the Lowndes County landscape in Alabama. Worn bricks, cracked by time. The wind whispers between the old walls almost like echoes of the screams that once dominated that place. November 1851. The sweet odor of the sugar cane and the metallic smell of the blood mingled in the air. What happened on that Thanksgiving night revealed an undeniable truth. When oppression goes beyond certain limits, it creates its own destruction. The hammer came down 7 times, 1 for each oppressor. 7 blows that echoed far beyond that dining room. A poetic symmetry between punishment and crime. The 7 lives taken that night were not the first to get lost in those lands, but were those who changed the course of history. Those who believe that goodness always prevails have never seen what Nathan saw. They never felt what he felt. It is said that on silent nights, among the remains of the old mansion, it is still possible to hear the sound of the hammer beating against the polished wood of the dining table. A beat, then another, and another, until silence returns, heavy as the justice that was fulfilled. If you want to follow more cases like this, which move with all society and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel so as not to lose any investigation. The Clearwater Plantation extended for more than 2,000 acres of fertile land in the heart of Alabama. Infinite rows of white cotton as bones under the sunset. Huge sugarcane fields rippled with the breeze, hiding tears and blood in their shadows. The large house rose imposing at the top of the highest hill. 3 floors of white, painted white wood, imposing columns supporting balconies that surrounded the whole structure, from which the masters watched their empire with cold eyes. 73 black souls inhabited the rotten wooden sheds behind the main house. Poor dirt floor constructions without windows, just cracks on the walls that let the winter cold and the suffocating heat of summer come in. There was no privacy. There was no dignity. Only bodies huddled after days of work that began before the sun was born and ended much after it put it. At the top of Clearwater's hierarchy was the patriarch, William Thornton, a 60-year-old man, a well-trimmed gray beard and blue eyes that never showed emotion. His word was absolute law. Below him, his 2 older children, James and Robert, managed the production with hands as hard as their father's. Irish foreman Patrick O'Malley was known for his metal, tied leather whip that left permanent marks. Local Reverend Jonathan Pierce blessed that structure as God ordered. And the 2 cousins of William Henry and Thomas Billington, businessmen of Montgomery who funded the expansion of Plantation, completed the power circle. The bronze bell sounded at 4 in the morning. The sore bodies rose in the darkness. A piece of moldy cornbread and cloudy water was the first meal. Then the long walk to the fields. The sun arose and with it the suffocating heat. Fingers bleeding picking the thorny cotton. Backs crashed the cane. 5-year-olds already worked. Old people worked to die in the fields. The trunk of punishment was strategically positioned where everyone could see. The whipping pole was watered with blood almost daily. Clearwater Mansion had a specific room in the basement. Thick walls that drowned oops. Metal instruments hanging from methodically. The slaves called that place Tears Room. When someone was taken there, he rarely came back the same. William Thornton called that place Correction Room. The smell of burnt flesh often emanated from that basement. On summer nights, when the large house windows were open, the screams escaped and hovered in property as tormented ghosts. During the day, the crisp of the whips marked the rhythm of the work. At night, The stuffy moans of the injured composed the macabre Clearwater Symphony, and soon, this sound would be replaced by another. The sound of a hammer blowing flesh and bone. The sound of the revenge that was sneaky as the fog that sometimes covered the fields in the morning. Nathan Hall was not like the others. Born in the neighboring plantation and sold to Clearwater at 12, he had something that the masters simultaneously valued and feared: intelligence. Tall for his 32 years, with huge hands and wide shoulders, Nathan had penetrating eyes that seemed to see beyond the visible. His muscular body carried old scars, but his posture never completely bent. William Thornton bought it for a specific reason. Nathan was a skilled carpenter. His hands created furniture as thin as imported from Europe. He knew every type of wood, every tool, every technique. The Casa Grande library, the cradle of babies Thornton, the long dining table where the family was meals, all Nathan's works. While other slaves rarely entered the big house, Nathan moved between these two worlds. I heard conversations, observed habits, learned. In Senzala, Nathan was respected. Even without bargaining, he used his privileged access to gain medicine for sick, extra food for the weaker, information that saved lives. When a slave was unjustly punished, it was Nathan who took care of the injuries later, applying herbs from her herbs she had learned from her grandmother. When William Thornton was absent, it was Nathan who subtly guided others on how to survive the cruelty of the master's children. At night, sometimes Nathan taught others to read hidden. He had learned by observing the classes of Thornton's younger children, a crime punishable with mutilation in most plantations. But Nathan knew that knowledge was a more powerful weapon than any hammer in his toolbox. "Stay tuned for cracks in their system," he used to say in whispers. "It is for these cracks that freedom will enter." This was the paradox that defined Nathan. The trusted slave that planned to destroy everything his masters built. The man who created beauty with his hands as he cultivated justice in his heart. The apparent loyal servant, which would be the instrument of destruction. Leave in the comments. Never give up the truth if you believe justice must reach all the oppressed. The cruelty in Clearwater followed a perverse logic, a calculated climbing. It started with small daily humiliations, degrading nicknames, food thrown on the floor, contradictory orders impossible to comply. Then came the smaller punishments, standing for hours under the scorching sun, sleep in the open, days without water. The Thornton believed in the art of gradual punishment. A new slave first witnessed the pain of others before feeling it on their own skin. For those who resisted, the progression was relentless. Public whipped, the trunk, the iron mask that prevented eating and drinking, and finally, the room of tears in the basement. In January 1851, Nathan saw James Thornton break the fingers of an 8-year-old boy because the child took a long time to bring fresh water. In March, Robert Thornton witnessed an old man eating land until he was suffocating because he dared to look straight at him. In July, the foreman O'Malley azored a pregnant woman until she loses her child for resting in the shadow for 10 minutes. Nathan watched, recorded each atrocity in his memory. His face remained impassive, the perfect mask of subservience. But inside, something changed. With each new horror, a piece of his soul transformed. Not in despair, but in cold determination. His eyes, when no one looked, reflected a silent fire. The nights have become more difficult. Nathan woke up bathed in cold sweat, the shouts of the victims echoing in his ears. His calloused hands tightened the rustic fabric that served as a mattress. Anger was a heavy stone in his stomach, growing up, hardening. "Patience is needed," he said to herself on sleepless nights. "The right moment will arrive." And then, in August, the time came that would destroy any trace of hesitation in his heart. Ruth was Nathan's younger sister, sold to Clearwater in the same lot as him. 28 years, skin of polished copper tone, kind eyes that could still smile despite everything. Nathan had protected her from childhood. When they were separated from their parents, he promised little Ruth that he would always be by his side. It was the only family left in the world. Ruth worked in the kitchen of Casa Grande. He was skilled with spices, New recipes that even impressed even refined Thornton guests. William Gabevia, her like a racehorse. "My black man has the gift," he told visitors while savoring the dishes. On that August, an important dinner would be served. New Orleans investors. In William's words, people who can multiply our fortune. Ruth worked since dawn. Exhaustion made your movements slower. Inevitable happened. A porcelain dish slipped from his trembling hands. The sound of the breaking dishes was followed by the deadly silence that precedes the storms in clear water. Thomas Billington, William's cousin, was in the kitchen. His temperament was legendary. "Do you have any idea how much this cost your stupid black man?" he shouted. Ruth kept her eyes low, apologizing. It was not enough. Nathan was working near the house, fixing a porch chair when he heard the first scream. He knew that voice better than his own. Ruth. He dropped his tools and ran. When he arrived at the back kitchen, he found his sister to the floor. Blood dripped from his face. Thomas Billington was holding a fireplace stirring, the spotted tip with red. "Go back to your work, Carpenter," Billington said without even looking at Nathan. "This is not your concern." Nathan felt his whole body shake. Never before defied direct orders. But at that moment, he couldn't move. "Please, Lord," he said in a controlled voice. "She will prepare another dish, quickly." Billington finally looked at him. A cruel smile came on his lips. "Are you telling me what to do, Black?" What followed was recorded in Nathan's memory as if it had been carved in stone. Billington dragged Ruth through his hair to the back courtyard. He called O'Malley and William's two sons. The message was clear. A lesson needed to be given. Not just for Ruth, but for everyone who witnessed. Especially Nathan, the privileged slave who needed to be remembered from his place. Ruth was tied to the whip pole. Your clothes were torn. O'Malley's whip cut the air 1, 2, 10, 20 times. Nathan was forced to watch, two men holding his arms. Each scream of his sister was a blade in his heart. When she finally passed out, they threw salt water on their open backs to revive it. "She still needs to serve dinner today," said James Thornton, laughing. "Her hands still work, right?" That night Nathan helped Ruth return to the senzala after she, staggering, served dinner to the smiling lords. He cleaned his injuries with warm water, applied the herbs he knew. Ruth, semi-conscient, squeezed her hand. "Do nothing, brother," he whispered. "They will kill you." Nathan kissed her forehead. "Rest now, little." When everyone slept, Nathan came out silently from the senzala. He walked to the large fig tree at the back of the property. He knelt on the damp land. There were no tears in his eyes, just a fierce determination. He took a small piece of fabric out of his pocket, a flap of the dress that his mother wore the day they were separated. He buried him at the base of the tree. "I swear on the memory of our parents," he whispered into the night. "They will pay. All of them." He also dug up a small package hidden for years. Inside, a piece of paper where he secretly practiced his writing. With a piece of coal, he wrote a single word: justice. He doubled the paper and swallowed him, sealing his oath with this ritual act. The decision was made. The plan would begin to take shape. 3 days later, Ruth died of fever. Their injuries had infected. Nathan escaped his grave with his own hands in the small slave cemetery behind the senzala. No ceremonies, no time for proper mourning. The next day, he had to go back to work as if nothing had happened, as if his heart had not been buried in that shallow grave with his sister. Clearwater was a well-filled machine of cruelty. Each gear of this machine had a face and name. William Thornton, the patriarch, did not dirty his own hands, but his cold gaze authorized each atrocity. James, the eldest son, had special pleasure in breaking newly arrived slaves. Robert, the middle son, was known for his creative punishments. Reverend Pierce used distorted biblical passages to justify horrors. Billington cousins treated people as disposable tools. And O'Malley, the foreman, performed all orders with brutal efficiency. Nathan knew each one deeply. He knew his habits, his addictions, his weaknesses. William drank whiskey every night before bed. James had aversion to high noises since childhood. Robert was superstitious. The Reverend was afraid of the dark. Henry Billington couldn't sleep without his pain medicine. Thomas Billington was allergic to certain herbs. O'Malley had a fire horror after an accident in his youth. It was in September that Catalisa Final Pain arrived. A new load, 5 newly married Africans. They did not speak English. They were disoriented and terrified. Among them, a tall man with tribal marks on his face. That man's eyes remembered Nathan of his own father. James and Robert decided that they would make a show to teach the newcomers how things worked in Clearwater. They forced all the slaves to watch. The tall man was chosen as an example. What followed was so barbaric that some of the oldest slaves of Clearwater fainted. 2 hours of meticulous torture. The man never begged, never shouted. His eyes remained fixed, worthy to the end. When he finally died, William Thornton just commented, "We waste a good specimen." Nathan was there, watching. Something definitive broke inside him at that moment. An invisible line was crossed. There would be no return. That night, as he cleaned the blood of the courtyard where the spectacle had happened, Nathan made his final decision. The plan that was formulating in your mind for weeks now had a date of Thanksgiving, when all Thornton and his associates would be gathered at the same table. The table he had built himself with his hands. October brought the first frost. Nathan was called to the big house. William Thornton wanted new notches at the dining table to impress the approaching holiday guests. "Something that represents the abundance of our lands," he ordered without looking straight at Nathan. "Yes, sir," said Nathan, the perfectly placed subservience mask. "It will be the most memorable table the Lord has ever had." William smiled, pleased. He did not notice the glow in the carpenter's eyes, did not understand the double meaning of those words. 2 weeks later, Nathan was dragged to the center of the courtyard. His crime, having been seen talking to one of the newly arrived Africans, trying to comfort her in her mourning. The royal accusation came from Robert Thornton. "This black thinks it's special. He thinks the rules do not apply to him." The punishment was public, 20 whip. Not as many as Ruth had received, but enough to leave permanent marks. Nathan did not issue a single sound during the punishment. His eyes remained open, fixed on the horizon, as if he could see a different future. James Thornton, annoyed by the lack of reaction, took salt and rubbed the open wounds. "Now shout, proud black." Nathan finally looked straight into the eyes of his tormentor. Such a penetrating look, so loaded with silent promise that James involuntarily stepped back. "You insolent!" he shouted, disguising his disconcerting. He kicked Nathan in his ribs repeatedly until he finally fell to his knees. While dragged back to the bloody and semi-conscious Senzala, Nathan heard William scolding his son. "Don't damage my valuable properties, James. Thanksgiving dinner is coming and we need it for the latest adjustments on the table." This public humiliation was the final seal in his commitment. Physical pain was secondary. What burned in his chest was the absolute certainty of his purpose. It was no longer a matter of if, but only how and when. The older slaves took care of their wounds that night. A lady named Old Sarah, who knew ancestral drugs brought from Africa, applied a dark paste to the back of Nathan. "I see something in his eyes, son," she whispered. "Something dangerous." Nathan didn't answer. His silence was enough answer. "Whatever it is," the old woman continued, "don't let hatred consume her soul. Revenge satisfies for a moment, but then it doesn't matter," Nathan said finally, his low but firm voice. "Some debts need to be paid, clear what it costs." In the following weeks, while his back healed, Nathan returned to work at Casa Grande. His posture was more curved now, his lower eyes, exactly what the masters expected to see after a successful lesson. What they didn't realize was that every minute inside that house now had a specific purpose. Each observation, each conversation heard, every detail noted, was a piece of the plan that was formed. The big plan began to take shape in Nathan's mind as one of his carpentry projects. First the basic structure, then the details, finally the finishes. meticulous, necessary, irreversible. First, the careful selection of allies. I couldn't do everything alone, but confidence was a rare luxury among people whose survival often depended on allegations. Nathan chose only 3. Samuel, a young 20-year-old who had lost his whole family in the hands of Thornton. Eliza, assistant cook that would prepare the food that night. And Isaiah, an old coachman who knew each road and trails in a radius of 50 miles. Conversations were discreet, fragmented over days. Never together, never obvious. One word here, another there. The complete message was never said aloud, but understood in the eyes, in the silences. If you could change everything, would you risk your life? Nathan asked Samuel as they fixed a fence together. The young man continued hammering without changing his pace. My life no longer belongs to me. With Eliza, the conversation happened in the garden as they harvested herbs. Do you know that seasoning that causes deep sleep? Nathan asked casually. Eliza didn't even lift her eyes off the plants. I know several, some that no one ever wakes up. Isaiah was the most direct. When Nathan vaguely mentioned a possible escape, the old coachman only nodded. The horses will be ready when the time is, he said simply. Just let me know when. The property mapping was the next step. Nathan already knew every corner of Clearwater, but now he watched with different eyes. The exact distance between the big house and the senzala. The time it would take to a scream to be heard. The habits of the night guards. The weapons stored at William's office. The fastest escape routes. All recorded meticulously in your trained memory. The necessary resources were gradually gathered so as not to raise suspicion. Nathan hid his best carpenter hammer, heavy with long cable, in a secret location. Samuel kept strong strings that mysteriously disappeared during repairs to the barn. Eliza began to dry certain herbs that would not be used in normal cuisine. Isaiah discreetly checked which horses were stronger and resting. The chosen date could not be more symbolic. November 27, 1851, Thanksgiving. Irony did not escape Nathan. One day to thank God for the blessings received. And what blessings were these, built on blood and misery? That night all oppressors would be gathered. William Thornton and his 2 sons, Reverend Pierce, the cousins Billington, the foreman O'Malley. 7 men responsible for hundreds of atrocities. 7 lives that, in Nathan's view, should be reapted the same night. They had a name for the plain, a whispered word between the 4 conspirators. Harvest. Because, as Nathan explained, every planting has its harvest day. They have planted cruelty for years. Now they will reap justice. The countdown began. 3 weeks until Thanksgiving, each day bringing the closest moment. Each night, the 4 discreetly confirmed the details. There were no documents. There was nothing written. Only whispered words and the determination recorded in the eyes. If we get caught, Nathan said on the eve of the big day, punishment will be worse than death. If we fail, Samuel replied, we will continue to live in hell anyway. The 26th of November dawned cold, and of course, the Clearwater plantation was sealing from activity. Preparations for the great Thanksgiving dinner occupied all domestic slaves. The turkey had been shot down, fresh vegetables of the gardens were harvested, the silverware was polished until shining. Clean sheets were placed in the guest rooms. In the main hall, Nathan worked in the last details of the long dining table. Delicate notches on the edges showed crop scenes, his thinner work until then. William Thornton went on to inspect, nodding with approval. You have talent, boy, he said, his condescending tone. That's why we keep him nearby, despite his occasional lapses. Thank you, sir, Nathan replied, keeping his eyes low. It's an honor to serve in this house. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Eliza prepared the breads and sauces for the next day. Discreetly, he mixed certain herbs to the spices. Not enough to kill, it would attract immediate suspicions. Just enough to make diners less alert, slower. At the stable, Isaiah checked the horseshoes of the top 3 horses, fed them with extra portions of oats. "You will need strength tomorrow night," he murmured to the ear of the animals. Samuel, working in the farthest field, mentally memorized each stage of the planned escape. The secondary trails that would prevent the main roads, the rivers they would need to cross, the possible hiding places. At nightfall, the first carriages began to arrive, additional guests for the big dinner, Montgomery traders, a county judge, some neighbors of plantations, rich, powerful men, all beneficiaries of the same cruel system. Nathan discreetly watched from the carpentry workshop. Each new face meant an additional obstacle, an unquieted complication. The plan would need to adapt. When the darkness was completely established, the four conspirators met briefly behind the barn. The meeting lasted less than 2 minutes. No unnecessary word was said. "Extra guests leave before the main dinner," said Nathan. "Only our 7 targets will be to the private supper at 9. "The spice is ready," confirmed Eliza. "It will start to take effect half an hour after being consumed." "The horses will be sealed and hidden in the southern woods," said Isaiah. 3 strong animals as we agreed." "The ropes are in place," added Samuel. "What about William's weapon?" "In the office, 3rd drawer," said Nathan. "Locked, but I have access." The 4 exchanged one last look, a silent pact sealed by the shared determination. None of them mentioned the obvious. They could be dead in less than 24 hours. "For the harvest," Nathan whispered. "For the harvest," repeated the other 3, before scattering themselves quickly in the shadows. Nathan barely slept that night. In his mind, he passed on every detail, every possibility, every potential obstacle. There was no room for mistakes. The carpenter's hammer was hidden under the workshop's floor, wrapped in cloth so as not to make noise when recovered. 7 blows. 1 for each oppressor. 7 lives for the price of hundreds of others. He thought of Ruth, in his broken body, in his last sighs. He thought of the African man, in his eyes worthy even in the face of the most brutal torture. He thought of children born in Clearwater, condemned to a life of servitude from the first cry. The weight of these memories has removed any remaining doubt. When the son was finally born on November 27, 1851, Nathan Hall was ready for what needed to be done. The Clearwater mansion shone with lights. Oil flashlights illuminated the way to the entrance. Fine candles burned in each room. In the main hall, a silver chandelier with 12 candles hung over the meticulously tidy dining table. The party started at 4 in the afternoon. 16 guests joined the Thornton for the social event of the year in Lowndes County. Black servants in special costumes served drinks and appetizers. Among them, Eliza circulated quietly with trays of small, temperate dumplings. He followed Nathan's precise instructions: offer only 7 targets, never to the guests who would leave early. William Thornton toasted with his guests, displaying his wealth, his influence. "To the white cotton and the gold it brings," he said, lifting his cup. Laughs echoed through the hall. None of them noticed the dark look Nathan threw from the kitchen door before returning to his tasks. Around 7 at night, as planned, the external guests began to say goodbye. Only the intimate circle would remain for special dinner. William, James, and Robert Thornton, Reverend Pierce, cousins Henry and Thomas Billington, and the foreman O'Malley. Meanwhile, in the stable, Isaiah discreetly prepared the 3 selected horses. In the kitchen, Eliza added the last dose of soporiferous herbs to cranberry sauce that would accompany the turkey. Samuel, assigned to serve the table on that special night, verified if the hidden ropes were in their places. At 8:30, Nathan was called to the hall. William wanted to show his work on the table to others before dinner. "See these carvings," the patriarch was bragged, passing his fingers through the finely worked edges. "No white carpenter in Montgomery does something like that. That's why a good black craftsman is a valuable investment." Nathan remained quietly as he was displayed as a curiosity. His eyes recorded every detail of the room, each man's exact position, the escape routes, the possible makeshift weapons if his hammer was not enough. "You can go now," said William finally. "And tell that cook to serve dinner. We're hungry." Nathan made a respectful bow. "Yes, sir. Everything will be ready in 10 minutes." At the back of the house, away from the eyes, Nathan recovered his hidden hammer. The family weight in the hand brought a strange sense of calm. This would be the instrument of justice that had expected so much. He kept it in his shirt, on his back, and went to the kitchen. Eliza was waiting for him, his eyes wide with nervous tension. "It's done," she whispered. "The sauce. Everyone will eat." "Is Samuel in position?" "Yes." Isaiah also confirmed the horses. Nathan nodded slowly. Then we started. The dinner was punctually served at 9 o'clock. The great hall, now with only 7 occupants, seemed strangely empty. The long oak table, Nathan's masterpiece, accommodated William at the head, his children on the right, the Reverend and the Billington cousins on the left, and O'Malley at the other end. Samuel served the drinks. Eliza brought the kitchen dishes. Nathan remained discreetly near the door, apparently awaiting some special order. The turkey was crank. The side dishes served. Cranberry sauce, specially prepared by Eliza. It was generously dumped over the portions. The conversation flowed lively, punctuated by laughter and gifts. "A prosperous year," exclaimed William, lifting his cup. "May our harvest remain abundant." Nathan watched every fork, every sip, waiting. Eliza's seasoning would take some time to take effect. They needed to be patient. 30 minutes later, the first signs began to appear. Henry Billington yawned several times. Reverend Pierce seemed to have difficulty keeping his eyes completely open. Robert Thornton complained that the hall was excessively warm. William, always warns, realized that something was wrong. "What's up with you? They seem to drink too much, and we barely passed the dessert." At that moment, Nathan exchanged a look with Samuel. It was time. Samuel approached the table as if to collect the dishes. Instead, with a quick movement, it erased half the candles. The room plunged into semi-darkness. "What does that mean?" William thundered, getting up. "It was the last movement you made." Nathan drew the hammer from his back and advanced toward the table. The first blow hit William Thornton in the temple with devastating accuracy. The patriarch fell without a sound, his body collapsing on the table Nathan had built so carefully. The chaos erupted. James Thornton, less affected by the sleepy, tried to reach the weapon he kept in the holster. Samuel intercepted him, knocking him down with a bronze chandelier. Reverend Pierce began to pray aloud, asking for divine mercy. Thomas Billington tried to run to the door, but his staggering legs betrayed him. Nathan moved with the cold accuracy of an executor. Each hammer blow was calculated, accurate. There was no anger at their movements, only relentless resolution. For each victim, a specific prosecution was pronounced in a low voice. For James, for breaking that boy's fingers. For Robert, for the old man that you made earthy to die until you die. For the Reverend, for using God's name to justify atrocities. For Henry Billington, for the women you raped. For Thomas Billington, by Ruth, my sister Ruth. For O'Malley, for each whip brand on the back of innocent people. 7 blows, 7 lives. The harvest was complete. The silence that followed was almost sacred quality. Nathan was still for a few seconds, the hammer dripping red over the polished floor. The metallic smell of the blood mixed with the aroma of the Thanksgiving dinner still untouched on some dishes. "It's done," he said finally, his strangely calm voice. Samuel ran to lock his doors. No one outside had heard. The big house was built with thick walls exactly so that the screams were not heard, an irony that did not escape Nathan. "We have an hour, maybe less, before someone notices," he said. "We need to move." The closing ritual began immediately. As Eliza and Samuel ran to the senzalas to wake the other slaves chosen to escape with them, Nathan completed his final act of justice. He took one of the oil flashlights and walked slowly through the hall, contemplating the bodies fallen on the table that his hands had created. One by one, poured oil over them. Then he took one of the candles still on. "The fire cleans," he murmured, remembering his grandmother's words. "The fire transforms." The flame touched the first body and quickly spread. Nathan observed for a moment the languages of fire by consuming those who had consumed others' lives for so long. Then, methodical as always, he continued his way through the house, spreading oil and fire, the library, the rooms, the office. Lastly, he went down to his basement and set fire to the tier room where so many had suffered. When he left the big house, the night sky was already lit by the flame. In front of the mansion, 43 slaves were gathered, not all of Clearwater, only those Nathan and his allies had tried reliable for the escape. Isaiah kept the 3 horses promised. Samuel distributed the few weapons they had managed to gather. Eliza organized small food packages. "We need to divide into 3 groups," Nathan explained. "We will follow different routes. We will meet in 6 days at the combined point if we survive." Some slaves cried silently. Others looked at the house on fire with expressions of astonishment and vindication. An elderly woman approached Nathan and touched her face. "You did what had to be done, son," she said. "Now we need to live to tell this story." The fire had already reached the 2nd floor of the mansion when the first shouts of alarm came from the white workers' houses on the property. Soon, bells would start playing. Dogs would be loose. The hunt would start. "It's time," Nathan announced. The 3 groups were quickly separated from Saponing in the shadows of the night. Nathan led the largest of them, 14 people including children, moving to the north through the swamps. The hardest, but also the less likely route to be followed by the persecutors. Behind them, Plantation Clearwater became a headlight of destruction, the flames rising so high that they could be seen miles away. In Lowndes County, the 1851 Thanksgiving Day would be remembered for generations. The news spread like fire in dry straw. In less than a week, all Alabama knew what happened. In 2 weeks, the whole South commented on terrified whispers. Clearwater's Massacre, some were called. The Hammer Revolt, others said. The newspapers described in macabre details the scene found by the neighbors who saw to see the fire. Official reports documented the brutality with which the 7 men had been killed. Alarmed letters circulated among slave owners, warning about signs of rebellion. The governor of Alabama issued a proclamation offering substantial reward for the capture of those responsible. The most disturbing for the authorities, however, was the method. Not a frantic attack, not a desperate rebellion like those that occasionally occurred. This had been calculated, patient, strategic, and even more terrible, it began to repeat itself. 3 weeks after Clearwater, a plantation in Mississippi reported a similar attack. The owner and his foreman were found dead, his heads crushed by a heavy object. The house burned down. 12 missing slaves. In January 1852, a farm in Georgia. In February, another in Alabama. Always the same pattern. Accurate blows on the head, fire, organized escape. "It is an epidemic of violence," said a senator of South Carolina in Congress. "An organized conspiracy to destroy our way of life." In the halls and dinner rooms of the great Southern houses, fear was installed where before there was only confidence and arrogance. Watches were duplicated. Punishments have become even more severe. But fear could not be whipped out of hearts. Nathan's method, as slaves began to call secretly, had planted a seed of terrible hope for some, inspiring for others. Among slaves, Nathan Hall's story became something larger than reality. It was whispered from ear to ear, from plantation to plantation. Some versions said he had released 100 people. Others claimed that he had sworn not to rest until the South was on fire. The state's response was merciless. The largest human hunt in Alabama's history was organized. Formed militias, imported tracking dogs especially from Cuba. Huge rewards offered by any information. Slaves were tortured to reveal the whereabouts of the fugitives. Some innocents were performed only to serve as an example. Isaiah was the first to fall, captured when trying to divert the persecutors from the path of a group of women and children. He refused to reveal any information even under brutal torture. He was publicly hanged in Montgomery as a warning. Eliza was next, betrayed by a domestic slave who hoped for mercy to his own family. She managed to swallow poison before being captured alive, denying the captors the satisfaction of breaking her will. Samuel's group was able to reach the Ohio River, the border with the northern free states. During the night crossing, they were ambushed. Samuel fought fiercely so that the others could escape. 6 bullets were needed to knock it down. His last words, reported by one of the survivors who managed to reach Canada, were, Tell Nathan that the harvest continues. Nathan and his group avoided the capture longer than anyone believed possible. They moved mainly at night, hid in swamps where dogs lost the trail, received occasional help from the underground network of abolitionists and free blacks. For 3 months, they remained as ghosts, always one step ahead of the persecutors. Stories circulated on Nathan's appearances in different places at the same time, as if he could multiply. Some said he had developed the ability to turn into crow to spy on patrols. Others swore that bullets did not hurt him because their skin had been hardened by the fire of justice. Reality, as always, was simultaneously simpler and more extraordinary. Nathan Hall was just a man. An exceptionally intelligent, determined, and skilled man, yes, but still, only human. The final siege came in April 1852, in the depths of a swamp near the Florida border. Nathan and the last 7 survivors of his original group were cornered by 3 teams of slave hunters, guided by a former slave who had been captured and tortured until it reveals its approximate location. Nathan knew there was no escape. He ordered others to scatter in different directions as he would attract the persecutors to himself. His last order was clear: survive. Remember, tell our story. Armed only with his faithful hammer and a 2-bullet pistol he had taken from a dead chase weeks earlier, Nathan Hall faced more than 20 armed men alone. Reports about his last fight vary greatly depending on who tells them. The official version, published in Montgomery Advertiser, simply stated that the fugitive black known as Nathan was shot after brief resistance. A footnote mentioned that 3 law agents lost their lives in fulfilling their duty. The slave hunters who participated in the capture told a different story in the bars and taverns where they drank to forget what they had witnessed. They spoke of 6 men killed before Nathan was finally knocked down. They described how he seemed to predict each movement, how it moved with the agility of a wounded panther, as he continued to advance even after taking the first shot. Among slaves and free blacks, history has taken mythical proportions. They said Nathan killed 12 men before falling, that his body was belated but still remained standing for minutes, staring at his killers with contempt, that his last words, clearly pronounced despite the injuries, were, "Others will come. The hammer always finds the nail." Nathan Hall's body was shown by the cities of Alabama as a warning. By order of the governor, it was finally hanged even dead and left hanging in the central square of Montgomery for 3 days before being buried in an unmarked place. Authorities believed Nathan's death would be the end of the story. They were wrong. In the following years, Nathan Hall's legacy has only grown. In the South Sends, his name was whispered as a talisman of hope. Mothers told the story of the Hammer Man to his children, modifying certain details to make it adequate to the small ears. Coded songs were composed, apparently innocent to the masters, but carrying messages about Nathan's method to those who knew how to interpret. Curious objects began to appear in slave communities. Small wood-carried hammers, hidden in secret places. Some considered them protective amulets, others symbols of a promise. In 1857, 5 years after his death, reports of secret pilgrims emerged visiting Nathan's alleged place of birth. Free blacks and fugitive slaves were risked to leave small offerings: folded nails, carved pieces of wood, red ribbons tied in branches. Scholars and historians, mostly white, documented the Clearwater Revolt as an isolated episode of irrational violence, minimizing its importance and organization. In universities, it was debated whether Nathan Hall had really been the leader or just a participant among many. But in oral stories passed through generations of former slaves and their descendants, Nathan was much more than a name in a police report. It was the man who proved that resistance was possible, that the system was not invulnerable, that sometimes justice came in the form of a hammer. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, and especially after the proclamation of emancipation in 1863, many regiments of Union's black soldiers carried small hammers carved in their pockets as they marched south, not as weapons, but as symbols of a larger fight that had started long before them. The true story of Nathan Hall, the carpenter who became avenger, the slave who dared to say no longer, survived on the banks of official history. Like an underground river, flowing invisible but powerful under the surface, feeding resistance roots that would once flourish in freedom. On the hot nights of Alabama, even decades after the events, Grandparents told their grandchildren about the man who built the tables where their oppressors ate, only for one day to turn them into their altar of justice. The hammer builds, they said, but it can also destroy what doesn't deserve to stand up. And so, the echo of Nathan's blows continues to reverberate over time, reminding us that the true story is not only in official books, but also in the whispers that the wind carries, in the low-voiced songs, and the unshakable determination of those who, like him, dare to turn tools into arms and resistance hopelessness. If you watch so far, it is because you care about these stories that marked our country forever. Leave a comment saying, "I watched here," so that I can meet you and know who really cares about the search by the historical truth. Like this video if Nathan's story touched her heart. Share Nathan's memory never forgotten.